Welcome to another segment of Engaging the Big Questions. I am Doris Jones from the Academy of Liberal Arts Integrative Learning Initiative. Today, we're honored to have with us Dr. Awni, who is a professor of practice at the Business School, and he's also the director of the John D. Gerhart Center for Philanthropy, Civic Engagement, and Responsible Business here at the American University in Cairo. Dr. Awni also teaches operations management courses at the undergraduate and MBA level. His areas of research are in applications of operations management in Egypt and for SMEs in particular, operations and supply chain innovations for base of the pyramid, upgrading of operations for Egyptian exporters. He also serves on the board of the Egyptian Company for Medical Investments and the United Nations Environment Program Finance Initiative for Principles of Responsible Banking. Dr. Awni also holds a BS in Computer Science and Statistics from Kuwait University. He holds an MS in Systems Science from the University of Ottawa and a PhD in Operations Research from North Carolina State University. Welcome, Dr. Awni.
Thank you.
Can you describe for us what is the mission for the Gerhart Center, and how would you describe that mission within the context of innovation?
Okay, well, at core, the purpose of the Gerhart Center is to promote social impact. Being at a university, you're going to find that a big part of what we do is about creating knowledge, disseminating knowledge, training, and also about creating social change agents, students. So if you ask me what is the mission, it's exactly this: promote social impact and create the environment that would enable the social impact to be more effective.
So Dr. Awni, can you explain in more detail more about the Gerhart Center's mission? When we initially spoke, you shared that there are a number of projects that are currently underway. One of which that I found to be especially interesting is student engagement, how the Gerhart Center engages students with a variety of activities within the center. Can we talk about some of the internships and how they serve to be beneficial for them?
Sure. We typically have two types of internships or civic engagement projects. One of them is a full year internship. So this is very much very focused in scope, because you can only get 12 a year, for example, but it's a very deep depth. And you place them in an organization with a clear social mandate. It varies all the way from an NGO to even sometimes we place them at ILO or Ashoka. I mean, big names in development. So this is one aspect. The other aspect is competitions. In competitions, what we do is that we select students from different universities across Egypt, and we put them in teams. And then there is a problem, there is an issue, there is a sustainability issue that they'll have to solve. The last one was, for example, about birth control, which is becoming a major problem in Egypt lately. So we talk about birth control. What are the needs for birth control? And then there is, we bring them with coaches, mentors, with specific content or context experts. So they tell them about the details that they need to know. And then they come up with initiatives to solve the problem. And most often we also have a seed money that we give it to the top 2 or 3, so they can actually pursue their initiatives further.
Oh, that is excellent. Yeah. A full year internship for some students to...
The internship is a year. The other one tends to be shorter. So it tends to be more of a 6-month duration.
And even 6 months is absolutely intensive. What wonderful opportunities. Absolutely. Let's talk more about the competitions where students are selected and they work with particular social or maybe not so much political, but social issues. You reference population growth
and birth control. Given that topic, how are students prepared to engage in such a conversation? I would imagine that the trainers or the organizations with whom students are placed with to learn the language of social change becomes especially important when you're reaching out to governorates around the country and discussing something as personal and perhaps not necessarily an issue that maybe many citizens of the country may not necessarily engage. But this type of training is so very critical and very important. Would you like to talk more about that particular
there
segment?
There might be what we call a selection bias. When you announce a certain project, certain competition under a certain theme, typically you get students with affinity or inclination to this type of an engagement. We don't require this. I mean, you still get students who have no idea about the context. All what we require from them is a social change kind of an attitude, that they want to exert change, they want to put the effort to sort of learn something and come up with an initiative.
Excellent. And also within that context, where does community science fit in? How are students then brought into the conversation about community science? Okay.
Well, community science is a very new concept that we've introduced in one of our webinars, and we'll talk about that at a later stage. Mm-hmm. At this stage, we're more concerned about community, that they engage the community. And when you talk about engaging the community, this is not, we try to sort of cut away the elitist mindset that I'm a college graduate or I'm in a university, so I know better than the community that I'm trying to sort of serve. We try to get them more in a mode of, you're a facilitator. They have issues, they have problems, they might have even reasons for doing what they're doing. So you try to sort of, being a change agent is not like you're going to tell them, I know the road to salvation, this is how it needs to be done. Far from it. You need to be a little bit more humble, you need to be a little bit more of a facilitator mindset, and you need to work with a team.
Absolutely. And I would venture to say that description lies at the core of what defines social change or communicating for social change. Yes. That students are being trained to be facilitators, that when they enter these communities, it is not a top-down engagement.
Absolutely.
That they are to facilitate, to help guide, and to offer assistance. And I gather also, as you said, not taking an elitist perspective, that citizens in the communities, they have a knowledge of what their needs are. And yes. Training students, the training, of course, that the Gerhart Center provides certainly helps to advance what communities actually need. So that, I think, really is a touchstone yes. for communicating for social change.
Absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
So let's expand more on this. So you have the competitions, you have the internships that may last up to 1 year. Some of the opportunities for students, as you said, can last for 6 months. What have been some of the major outcomes? What are students saying about their participation in these activities?
Okay, before I go there, the other thing we do, which is interesting also, we teach community-based learning in public universities. And we've done that in many, we don't go to the American university, to the British universities, to the GUC, to the private universities, all the big ones. We go to the universities that are more in rural areas, maybe Upper Egypt, and what we do it on 2 layers. First layer, we teach the professors how to conduct a community-based learning. And then we also teach the students, student leadership. What is the importance of a CBL? The idea, some of those students, they are very innovative if you just sort of give them the little spark, and then they will go all the way. Now, you asked me about what do we see. I've seen many of them eventually. I mean, they come up and they work, for example, in very interesting areas, ILO, Ashoka, and they're really doing marvelous work. Some of them would start their own initiatives, which are very, very socially driven. What we insist in the composition of the students that they are diversified. So we put a mix. Part of the interesting part of the mix is they benefit each other on the long run.
Exactly.
That if I need something about a certain area or a certain region or a certain, I met this guy in this competition with the Gerhart Center. So what I see now is that there is an interesting impact on them as individuals and in this choice of career that they take. What remains to be a little bit, and it takes longer time, is their societal impact. That takes longer time. I mean,
of
to
course.
sort of get a real impact, it will take you probably 10 to 15 years.
Excellent.
But they're on the right track. That's the most important part.
Absolutely. They're on the right track thanks to the Gerhart Center. And on that note, Dr. Awni, you referenced that part of your work involves teaching the teachers at universities within the country, not necessarily other American universities or the British University or even larger state universities, but you find that your teaching is more applicable and perhaps have long-term sustainability in Upper Egypt, rural communities, beginning by teaching the teachers about community-based learning and then introducing students to what CBL is. That is absolutely strategic. And based on what you've shared, it has produced substantive results where, as you noted, some students go on to work for Ashoka, which is an organization that I became familiar with almost 20 years ago. And certainly its founder, who I think is a Harvard University graduate,
Yes.
and the Ashoka headquarters is in Washington, D.C.
True.
And so the diversity that you also reference, that it's very important to have a diverse mix of students and faculty and citizens from around the country
Yes.
to actually facilitate change. And as you noted, the real impact, societal change, certainly takes longer. But as you noted, you have begun the process. You've planted the
Right.
seed that will proliferate and flourish into the change that is necessary. Let's then expand more on some of the other initiatives that the Gerhart Center is doing. I must commend you in your leadership as the director of the center that these initiatives are wide-reaching and they certainly have an impact upon the entire country. What are some other projects that you're working on?
When you look at what we do at the Gerhart Center, I mean, we have the three verticals: the philanthropy, civic engagement, and responsible business. And then the type of activities we do are research, civic engagement, or youth leadership programs, and capacity building. Now, when you look at research, what we're trying to do, we're trying to sort of expose or analyze or bring to the light best practices that are in the region. I'll give you an interesting example. One of the case studies we wrote was about a university in Durman, Sudan. It's called Ahfad. Now, Ahfad University is an elitist girls' school. A condition for graduation that they have to go and live with an underprivileged community, engage with them, and then write a proposal in support of the need of the community. This is brilliant.
Yes, it is.
And it's in Durman, it's in Sudan. And nobody talks about it. I've heard about it from Lisa Anderson, actually, a few years back. And then we managed to sort of get a Sudanese lady here. We got the connection to Ahfad through a network that we have. It's called Telwar Network, which is the network of universities. And then we decided to write a case study about it. So we had a case study about it. We try to sort of, one of our recent publications is about trends in philanthropy in the Middle East. And which is interesting. Nobody talks about this. I mean, there is a dearth of information about this. Our most recent project that we're going to embark on is creative finance for social impact. When you talk about finance for social impact, very rarely people talk about the role of foundations. Even though I tell people, bankers, for example, impact investment, the expression itself was coined by the Rockefeller Foundation.
Exactly.
And people now talk about blended finance, which is basically anything in the beginning, in the start, even if it is a pure commercial, it's very risky. So typically in a very early stage, you're going to find governments are paying for this or philanthropy. let alone coughing up your own money. But that's the idea. It takes you a while until you get to a radar screen of a typical investor, whether it's an angel investor, whichever you call it, impact investor. So at early stage, you're really talking about philanthropy, a role of philanthropy. And people misses that.
And there are so many wonderful initiatives that are occurring when, just from the legal perspective alone, communities having legal advice. As you and I both know, having competent legal representatives guide you through complex processes, specifically when it involves land ownership, that is splendid. And I might also add, you're referencing to the multiple stages that leads to real philanthropy. I might say, and even cite the example, I can distinctly remember about 10 years ago when the Gates Foundation was investing many of its millions in initiatives around the country. And I can recall that I learned about the high rate of diabetes here in Egypt, and that I thought it would be wonderful if the Gates Foundation could, in its philanthropic process, perhaps invest some funding with the various medical schools and leading institutions to help address and perhaps even promote programs to alert citizens at the citizen level about what are the factors that are contributing to such a high rise in diabetes, which, as we know, is one of the most treatable diseases in the world.
Okay, so this is an interesting, the diabetes part is a very interesting venue for CSR, for pharmaceutical companies producing insulin. Insulin, as you've mentioned, it cuts across all ages, cuts across all social, economical classes, and it's detrimental in the long run if it's left untreated.
Absolutely.
So that's a very interesting, one of the interesting companies that does very excellent work about this is Novo Nordisk. And it was actually mentioned explicitly in one of our webinar series.
Yes.
Now, I want to get back to the research part. In addition to publishing case studies and research about specific things, specific practices, best practices, regional, that we want to highlight, we also do convening activities. It started in October. The last thing we've done before the COVID was in October 2019. And we've hosted a MENA BOP, Base of the Pyramid Summit. We brought major players in the field. And they were talking about, in addition to what is a BOP, they were talking about innovation at the base of the pyramid, grassroots innovation. They were talking about entrepreneurship at the base of the pyramid, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in lockdown, COVID, we started by saying we're going to host an AUCN, who's also on the board of the Gerhart Center and the board of the American the School of Business at the American University in Cairo. And he's a tribal leader. And he was talking about the role of youth in development, in community development. And it was actually an article that was actually published in one of the journals. So we wanted to bring him in. And then we've decided, hey, let's just bring more people. We have lots of interesting people who can talk about interesting topics in our network. Now, so we started the Gerhart Center webinar series.
Very nice.
The purpose of it is to promote concepts that are not mainstream, and we think they should become mainstream. I can give you many examples. Bottom-up approaches, community-led initiatives, grassroots innovation, et cetera, et cetera. And we also talked about what is the purpose of business? How could companies engage with society? Yes, there are some talk about it. It's becoming a little bit more prevalent, but it's not a mainstream yet. And we think that should become mainstream.
Excellent.
So we've managed to get brilliant speakers. One of the interesting topics that we got, for example, is a professor, Kobe Davis. He came from University of Maryland, and he was talking about community science. And his idea is that you have to democratize science. This is part of the climate justice. If you want to get really climate justice, you have to get the community to monitor the impact of the weather, the climate change on them, or the pollution on them. So this is his starting point. Now we brought after that another guy who is a Shuka fellow.
Yes.
And he has an interesting device that collects rain in Rajasthan, which is an area next to Pakistan, in India, and it's an arid area. They
Yes.
get lots of rain in the summer and no rain in the winter. So what this guy has a device to sort of collect the water under the earth in the rainy season, and then he brings it up so it's an interesting device.
That's innovation at its best.
Yes, but the most interesting innovation is what he did around it. He would go to ladies in the area. Now, ladies are not treated very well in those kind of societies.
Yes.
And he would give them the control of the water in the dry season. So this is really empowerment, women empowerment at its most.
Absolutely.
At its most. And of course, he gets into issues of governance. How do you govern the water? How do you govern the distribution of water? So you're more concerned about the equity of the distribution. So at any rate, my point is that it's not just a device. It's not just a technology. Most of the time, you'll have to have an ecosystem innovation around it to support it. And for me, that's the major issue of this. But anyway, we got many interesting. I mean, you can check. I can share the link with the audience. We've got very good speakers. I mean, some of them people would know right away. When I talk about Jeffrey Sachs, when I talk about Jacqueline Novogratz, when I talk about Bill Drayton, for example, Ashoka, some big names. But some are not as big. But if you're an expert in an area, you would know them. I mean, Mintzberg, Colin Mayer. Many more. So it's really interesting for us because this is what we think we should be promoting.
And it's the core of your work, certainly. The ecosystem innovations. As I think back to the community expert who developed this device that would allow for the extraction of water from beneath the earth during the winter, and that he brought the women in so that they could become empowered. I can understand why he chose the women specifically, because as I may have shared with you several years ago, I was focusing on the Nile River.
Yes.
And I was looking at the issue of water, not only among the riparian nations who share the Nile, but also water scarcity, water diplomacy, water resource management around the world. And what did I find? Primarily in countries like India, Pakistan, and many countries here in sub-Saharan Africa, the women are primarily responsible for the collecting of the water.
Yes.
Why? Because it is the water that is used to prepare the meals, to wash the clothing.
Cooking,
and these are responsibilities that are ultimately those of the women.
Yes.
So this innovator was absolutely ingenious in bringing in the women.
Absolutely.
So creating two critical moments of innovation: women's empowerment, while also providing water during a time when there is less water available during the winter. That is excellent. And these webinar series, we certainly want to showcase and highlight them, that perhaps, again, within this program and to bring an awareness to the AUC community that the Gerhart Center is involved in a variety of initiatives that are far-reaching beyond the borders of our campus, and certainly far-reaching beyond Egypt. So this is innovation at its best. Let's talk more then about the other convening activities, and perhaps maybe showcasing other webinar series that you'd like to talk about.
The other thing we do something called Gerhart Center Social Talks. Which tends to be, many of them are in Arabic actually, because we talk, for example, like the new civil society law, for example. So he brought an expert and he talked about the details about it in Arabic. The last one we had right before Ramadan was about Islamic Waqf, endowment, which is an old concept in Islam, and it has been misused lately, but the purposes of it are very interesting. I remember I've heard the Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, who's the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, And he was saying that in Islam you could actually have a waqf to renovate and maintain monasteries. Which for me is like, whoa, this is very interesting. I mean, we should talk about this. I mean, in a country where we really have frictions lately, I mean, between Muslims and Christians.
Yes.
I mean, such a thing should be celebrated. That you actually, it's part of what you could do with waqf for, is to do this. But anyway, we talked about it in Arabic, and the audience was very, typically, it's not a wide audience, but you get very engaged people, and you talk about topics that we think are critical in terms of promoting social impact. There are many other things we do. I mean, the other thing I wanted to tell you, I mean, briefly about it, we do also capacity building and upgrading, and we started by offering project management courses to companies or foundations or NGOs. They have a very different financial expectations of how much they pay. This is not a multinational that they can afford to pay 40,000 grands for a course.
Sure.
Their means is probably 2 to 3K, for example.
Sure.
But we provide that because we think it's very interesting, and we're not sort of trying to sort of get money out of it, make money out of it. This is for us. If it covers expenses, we're very happy.
Excellent.
We also started doing courses about monitoring and evaluation, which is a very much needed thing. And the audience for us are either foundations at large. So we talk about the Egyptian Red Crescent, for example, as one of our clients, the Misr al-Khair is one of our clients, or individuals who are interested in enhancing their credentials. So we do that. I mean, that's the. We are in the process of developing many different curriculum that we think that the market is demands. There is a need for it.
Oh, this is excellent.
So that's pretty much what we do in the Gerhart Center.
And you know, on that note, I think we're at a very good point where we can talk more about your efforts and those of the Gerhart Center to really help our students understand that their engagement with community-based learning is one in which you are attempting to reverse the top-down thinking. That all too often there's this elitist mode that far too many of our students enter communities, and they're not yet fully aware that their presence is to serve as a facilitator. And there's so much that they must learn. A level of respect, acknowledging that this community has an existing knowledge base, that they're looking for assistance. They're wanting your help to help advance their initiatives, but not to come in and necessarily take over or to demonstrate that I'm the educated person. Let me show you how.
Right. This is the problem we find across in development.
Yes.
At large. This is the top-bottom approach. You're going to find that there is, as you've mentioned, somebody who's very well educated, could be from a top school, and they go to an area and then they pretend they're going to show the locals or the road to salvation, which is, I mean, come on. I mean, even in consulting, even in commercial consulting, the first rule you learn is the company probably have the solution. They just need facilitation. They just need, and there is a power play sometimes that sort of hinders the solution to sort of surface up. So your role as a good consultant, which is very similar to your role as a good sustainable development person, is to facilitate.
Yes.
Is to understand the governance issues or the political issues that are in a certain community, and try to sort of lift it so you can actually come up with a solution. But they have to own it, because if they don't own it, it's very much like, imagine you have a hose, water, and you sort of open it loose in a desert area. You'll have weed, you have lots of weed. As soon as you stop this water supply, give it a week or so, and this whole thing is going to be burned.
Yes, certainly.
You did not create long, deep roots.
Yes.
Long, deep roots means community ownership. It's a must.
Yes, it is.
And we often fail in this. We
I
often
have a
fail in this.
great appreciation for that. As when we
Focus on a sport and you're trying to create gold medalist, this is very different than trying to focus on a sport to try to make it, many people are actually doing this kind of a sport.
yes,
Now, the interesting part that when you focus on gold medalist, you're very selective, you're very exclusive, and it doesn't diffuse well across. The other one, when you focus on everybody is becoming a reasonable swimmer, you actually have a higher chance of getting more gold medalists.
absolutely.
The problem, it takes longer time.
Yes,
It takes longer time. And it takes much more cost. It's more costly. Because if you want to make everybody, if you want to democratize swimming, for example, that means you'll have to have a decent swimming pool everywhere. That's expensive.
certainly.
If you want to just target the, but anyway, development is about democratizing. It's not about a selected few.
Yes,
And that cuts across. I mean, even when you talk about entrepreneurship in universities, you're going to find that there is a hidden, subtle attempt there to find the next unicorn. They actually pride themselves that some of our third graduates are unicorns. For me, if I look at it from a development point of view, the core idea of entrepreneurship is teaching individuals self-sustenance,
yes.
how they can sustain themselves, how they can find options for themselves. And I don't care if you have an enterprise that is just floating above the water or you're a unicorn. For me, yes, floating above the water, I'm going to have many millions of it.
Absolutely.
So the impact of it, the social impact of it on the whole country is going to be much, much, much more. But again, we tend to focus on the stars. This is an elitist mindset.
Yes, it is.
And it's, unfortunately, it's ingrained in our education system across. Now, the AUC for me, I mean, we're a small school, so we're 6,000. We're not as Cairo University, we're not as Ain Shams, we're not, but
Sure.
we have a very interesting advantage as an incubator of ideas. You can start the new ideas, you can test it, you can bring it, you can showcase it, and you can help others do it. But we need to change a little bit the concept of the purpose of education. We need to change, and we're talking about it. I mean, some of the schools, I know this business school, for example, they recognize that the use of the GPA, for example, as an indication of who is better than, it's just float.
And this
just
has in itself created major challenges for the School of Business
Right.
that so many students
Right.
want to declare, which has created this mechanism in which the GPA continues to increase. I
Right.
want to go back to 2 points that you raised, which I think are absolutely mission critical, that human development for all, that this focus on the unicorn, that putting in place an infrastructure that could perhaps flourish, that helping students to understand that your education is not exclusively for self, that to be educated, that the entire system, educational system, is one in which that serves the primary purpose to embolden and improve humanity.
Yes.
And starting with one student at a time. What then, within that context, where do you see AUC moving towards perhaps implementing this as a mindset? Is this possible, Dr. Awni? Is this possible?
I think it is. I think it's very much possible. You just have to part of the thing we're missing is that we're not teaching students how to engage with society, properly with society. And this is not an easy task, by the way. We at the Gerhart we've been doing it for a while, and if you ask me what is the way to do it, there is no short answer to it. It's very hard. It's a very hard issue. But a problem you have is that even the professors don't know how, so they cannot teach the students how to do it. The whole environment does not promote this. I mean, even when you talk about CBL really is about a pedagogy, a way of doing certain pedagogy, and you try to sort of go. So it's more of a. There is a difference between science for community than science from community.
Yes.
There's a different story. We teach them the for, we don't teach them the from. From is about you go there, you understand them, you facilitate them, you enable them to solve their problems. We're not doing this. And this is the most sustainable part.
Absolutely.
Yes. So if you ask me, this is the CBL needs to be a little bit fine-tuned, and you take it to the second level.
And that second level involves
Really to teach them how to engage with society.
exactly.
And not engaging with society is not like you go there and you form for like a focus group or whatever, and then you say, this is participatory. No, I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about you listen to them. And it's interesting. I mean, when you start getting into development, my background is 100% quantitative.
Sure.
So you start getting into development, you start to learn about things like ethnography, for example, which is really an anthropology mindset.
Yes, it is.
In business schools, they're talking now more and more about culture of an organization, which is, a culture is typically an anthropology term.
Yes, it is.
And ethnography is how you go and you conduct interviews. So you actually can get ideas from them or how they use a certain thing. Unilever has used this in India, interesting enough. The perception of a product or what is the value of a product is very class dependent. And most of the time when we do the studies, we do it for top tier, an A or a B customer. Now for a C or a D customer, the value of the usage of a product is very different. Now, how do you know that? Is ethnography studies. Interesting enough, this is one of the webinars we had. We brought people actually, again, from India, and they conducted this ethnography study for Unilever. And you see how they do things. They see it takes longer time, and they're more involved. They're sitting with the people. They're trying to sort of not, a direct questionnaire is wrong because they'll try to appease you. They'll try to give you what you want to hear.
Of course.
I'm not interested in this. I'm interested in how you go about things.
Yes.
And I think even the concept of ethnography is spilling over even in design thinking. In design thinking, people talk about how the customer would use your product. And that's going to be the basis of designing the product.
And it's interesting you would mention design thinking. I was just reading a wonderful article in The Atlantic just last week about the interdisciplinarity of design thinking and how it is being used for innovative purposes, specifically in the area of philanthropy.
Yes.
So you're absolutely right. Well, we have had the most engaging conversation with Dr. Ali Awni, who is the director of the Gerhart Center. He has talked about human innovation, community-based learning, training faculty and students to become facilitators in communities, to remove the top-down mindset that all too often eradicates what is necessary for real social change. The webinar series, which we want the entire AUC community to become familiar with, and perhaps most importantly, that for our students here at the American University in Cairo, the education that you are acquiring is certainly for your benefit, but the ultimate purpose of an education is to not only advance oneself, but to see how you can implement your educational attainment in the communities from which you hail. Thank you, Dr. Awni, for sharing with us such a wonderful discussion. We wish you and your colleagues at the Gerhart Center much continued success. And on behalf of the Academy of Liberal Arts, Integrative Learning Initiative, and of course, my wonderful team with Engaging the Big Questions, we want to extend to you another invitation to come back and talk more about the work at the Gerhart Center. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Ali Awni from the Gerhart Center, and we are engaging the big questions.